Welcome to Coffee and Astronomy. I'm Jim Craig, and this is part 3 of a 3-part series that I've been doing on different kinds of telescopes you're likely to encounter as an amateur astronomer and most professional astronomers. The first one was on refracting telescopes, the sort of telescope used by Galileo. The second was on Newtonian reflectors, invented by Isaac Newton, and this is on Cassegrains. More specifically, the catadioptric Cassegrain. Now, the Cassegrain telescope was first described in a journal by Laurent Cassegrain in 1672, which is why we still call them Cassegrain telescopes, although there is evidence that people were trying it as early as 1632, 40 years earlier. Now, the Cassegrain design telescope is a reflecting telescope with a mirror at one end and a secondary mirror, just like the Newtonian reflector, only instead of the mirror being canted at an angle so the image goes up to an eyepiece that's toward the front of the telescope, it's parallel with the mirror at the back, so the image comes in, reflects off the primary mirror, comes to the secondary mirror, and then goes back. And the way you're able to get an image is to put a hole in the middle of the primary mirror and put your eyepiece behind that. The primary and the secondary are all on the same visual axis. So you don't have to get any off-axis things, that sort of thing. The secondary mirror in most Cassegrain telescopes that you're likely to encounter will be suspended on a piece of glass. In a Schmidt Cassegrain, which is one of the types of scopes I have an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain telescope, that plate, that glass plate, is a corrector plate. It actually has a figure in it that corrects for errors out at the sides, out at the edges of the primary mirror, which you also find with Newtonian reflectors. There is what is sometimes called a spherical aberration. If the mirror doesn't have its shape perfect, you wind up out at the edges of your image, the edges of the mirror, you get little sort of cone-shaped stars. They're kind of fan-shaped. And the corrector plate on a Schmidt Cassegrain takes care of that. So you get a wider field of view that is nice and flat. The other kind of Cassegrain you may encounter is a Maxitoff Cassegrain. Those are usually smaller ones. And the primary mirror and the secondary mirror are both, rather than being like elliptical, are both spherical. And they correct for each other. And the corrector plate, there's also a spherical corrector plate, and usually the secondary mirror is some metal that is deposited on that primary, or on that corrector plate. So you can't adjust the secondary, which in some ways is advantageous. It means it can't get out of adjustment unless something really bad happens to your scope, in which case send it back to the manufacturer to get it fixed, or somebody who really knows what they're doing. The biggest disadvantage with Cassegrain scopes is expense. Dollar for dollar, they are among the most expensive telescopes. Not quite as expensive. An 8-inch refractor is going to cost you a huge amount. An 8-inch Newtonian reflector is only going to cost you a few $100s. An 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain telescope, you can expect to spend in excess of $1,000 for a high quality one. You can get them at a lower price used. Those are the big disadvantages. They're also kind of heavy because you've got all of that mass packed into a fairly small area, but you've got the primary mirror, the secondary mirror. They're going to weigh almost as much as a similar size, similar diameter Newtonian reflector. Another disadvantage with the refractor and the Newtonian reflector, when you do the focus, you're moving the eyepiece. Just a little bit of mass gets moved. When you're focusing a Schmidt Cassegrain, you're moving the whole primary mirror, and that's a lot of mass that's resting on the center. Essentially, there's a tube in the middle of it that holds that mirror in place, and if the grease that's on that is a little bit sticky, it can be hard to focus a Schmidt Cassegrain scope. Also, that mirror tends to move a little bit more, not very much. I personally haven't had any problem with it on mine. But I have an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain and a 90mm Maxitoff Cassegrain, and I like them both. One big advantage is you get long focal length in a small scope. And I talked about focal ratios a little bit, and I do want to do an optical video that talks about focal ratios and that sort of thing. My 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain is an F10. That means that if it's an 8-inch diameter or 203.2 millimeter diameter, that means its focal length is 80 inches or just over 2 meters, 2,032 millimeters or 203.2 centimeters. So that's a fairly long scope. That's on the order of 7 feet 8 inches. I'm sorry, 6 feet 8 inches. So a long scope. I can't fit that in my car. But because it uses folded optics and a curved secondary mirror, that whole scope is probably about 24 inches long maximum. That easily fits even in my tiny little car that I have. I can put the scope on one side, I can put the tripod head, the mount on the other side, put the tripod legs across the back, put my eyepiece box in the middle, everything fits. So they're compact scopes. So if you don't have a lot of room for moving a scope from point A to point B, if you don't have a station wagon or a pickup or a minivan or something, you may want to consider getting a Cassegrain scope. My 90 millimeter scope, it fits in a bag that I can carry over my shoulder. It's a little weighty, but I can take it with me anywhere I go. Now, I got both of these scopes at auction at good prices, so they didn't cost me as much. I do know that the original retail cost on my 90 millimeter was $595 for essentially a 3-inch scope, almost 4 inches. I got the scope for $50. I bought the mount for $15. So for $65, I got a decent scope. So check auctions. This was at a club auction. And you can shop around and get good prices on scopes. Now, one of the things that I'll talk about at some point is buying a used scope. Because, things to look out for, things to be aware of, and the idea that just because a telescope is old does not mean it's necessarily a bad scope. So watch for that in the future. And if you want to help me keep bringing you these videos, consider becoming a patron. You can head over to patreon.com, Planet of Mystery. That's www.patreon.com/planet_of_mystery. And for as little as $1 a month, you can help me bring you these videos. You can get access to content that I make just for my patrons. I did an audio recording about the problems of trying to make these videos when you live in a residential neighborhood and your neighbors like to mow the lawn. I also have different tiers of membership that give you different advantages. I do giveaways. I make wallpapers for folks. One of the things that I include is with your Patreon membership, you send me a date and I will make you a custom star map for that date that you can print out on your own. At the $5 level, I will print it out and send it to you. At higher levels, we can negotiate exactly what you get with that star map. So that sort of thing is available to you. Also, consider just giving a little thumbs up if you like what I do here. Consider subscribing. Give me a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future. So until you hear from me next time, this is Jim Craig with Coffee and Astronomy. If you got some clear weather where you are, get out and look up.